Welcome everybody to our YouTube Wednesday study session that shall not be named. Looking forward to celebrating with everybody as the high holidays are over and now we're back to studying every Wednesday. We've got a great crew here with us, as you can see. I'm also recording it on the cloud to make sure we have a record of it. So welcome to Larry and Michael and Sid and Eva and Paul may be there and Jane may be there and Harriet may be there. No, they're not there. So we're going to do two things today. First, we're going to study about a wonderful topic, Napoleon and the Jews. I'm doing this topic because I just taught a class on it, which I taught previously. And then we're going to discuss when and if we want to do a live in-person studies session and if we want to do a live Hanukkah party again this year as we did last year. So we'll do that at the end. So what we're going to first talk about is Napoleon Bonaparte. You may have heard of him. He was kind of famous for a short time. And many people, when we look at Napoleon, like if you're especially a younger person, younger than me, or my age, you saw Time Bandits was this irreverent movie from the 80s, or you saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or you see other farces, and Napoleon is always this short little guy with his hand here. He's got this big Napoleon complex, obviously, because it's named after him. He's got the comb over. He kind of has like a chubby, ridiculous kind of face. You know, he is always the comedic relief. And it's ironic because he was an incredible figure. And in my estimation, one of the most important, if not the most important people of the entire 19th century. Not only that, from a Jewish perspective, he was the most important person of the 19th century. He is a Jewish hero on a level that few others have ever achieved, on the level of Cyrus, who was considered the Messiah when he let the Jews return back to Israel after Exodus. After being sent to Babylon, akin to Alexander, who brought Greek culture to the Jewish world, akin to Shabtai Zvi, who was considered the Messiah before he was found out to be false and converted to Islam. Napoleon was so popular in the Jewish world that many people actually thought he was the Messiah. He was considered the Messiah, the descendant of David, and that's how exciting Jews were, how exciting he was to Jews. And we're going to talk about why. Some of the other things we got to remember about Napoleon is just from a basic case, he was incredible. What he did, he established the Bank of France, incredible, a new tax system. He created the Legion of Honor. He had 20,000 miles of imperial and 12,000 miles of regional roads created, all across even the Alps. Created the archives. He beautified Paris. He saved the Louvre. He created monuments all over the place. He created think tanks to help with the national economy and create vital He restored the Catholic Church to France and made Protestantism, if that's how you would call it, equal in the eyes of the country. So he made it legal to be Catholic and Protestant and have equal rights for both. He established the codes of law that are continuing in many places today, created the Imperial University, created more educations, created schools of obstetrics and veterinary services. Of course, his principles of war are studied by every military academy in the world. Not only that, has anybody ever had canned food before? Why do we have canned food? Because Napoleon wanted a way to feed his troops. So they developed a canning process. How do we know what's going on in ancient Egypt? Because during the campaigns of Napoleon, they found the Rosetta Stone. And because the people who found it were educated, they didn't destroy it. They realized its importance And so we now have the ability to translate what ancient Egypt was saying. So those are just a few basic things, and those are not even the most important things by any stretch of the imagination. We're going to now talk about what was truly his legacy, a legacy that is beyond anybody else, probably the last 300 years. Most important person, maybe in the 19th century. I mean, there's a couple other people. Darwin would be another, obviously, but he might be way ahead of Darwin.
Yeah. Rabbi,
Yes.
could you fill in a little bit of the gap between the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon and what brought him into? I'm always intrigued as far as, how a corporal can get into, I think he was a corporal or something, into power. What were the conditions in France that led to his?
And we're going to talk about that right now. So we're going to
okay, great.
We're just going to touch on that because really I want to talk more about his connection to the Jews. Okay, so Napoleon is basically a minor noble, so he is definitely in the upper echelons. And from the very beginning of the campaign for for the overthrow of the system, he was on board. So one of the things that was essential was he was supportive of the revolution from day one, basically. And not only that, he distinguished himself, quite frankly, in several campaigns in Palestine and other places. And he basically was just very good at his job. And from the very beginning, his complete support, his military prowess, which a lot of people don't give him credit for, but is in many respects what led him to be who he was. So he became very prominent in several campaigns during the revolution in the area of France, and he had already had experience in war beforehand. So what he did most importantly, of course, comes after he basically takes over. But remember, he comes forward during a time of complete upheaval. And whenever there's upheaval, usually one person rises in some way or another. And that person can rise from almost any place, as we've seen. The whole idea of the overthrow was that the upper echelons were not going to be in charge. He was a minor noble. So even though he had a little upper crust connection, that's it. He was a corporal, but he rose very quickly, and mostly because of his personality, and because, I think even more, because of his view of other people. He viewed other people as equal inherently, but only superior because of talent and ability and drive. And so he was one of these people who was able to work with everyone. It didn't matter where they came from, and this is going to be why he is going to be so important. It's because he looked at everyone not because of where they came from or their histories. He looked at them and said, are you capable of doing something? Do you have the drive to do it? Do you have the mentality to get better? And that's why he became so popular, and that's why he took over, because he really was a new type of person. And this is the type of person we want to be today. So in other words, we are who we are in no small portion because of Napoleon. And we're going to learn that. So he went to an esteemed academy. I don't know if he was a corporal for a very short time, maybe, but he was an officer already coming out. And during this period, he was promoted. Helped with. He helped. There was helped put down riots. I think was one of the big things he did, and when the royalists and revolutionaries and Corsican nationalists are all fighting with each other, he is able to really quell everything. And before he's 25 years old, he's already a general. So, and remember, this is like in a period of a few years. We're talking a period of 5 years. He goes from graduating and becoming, I guess, a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, whatever you are when you get out of military school. This is before the revolution. And becomes 2 years after the revolution, he's already a general. That's how good he is. And he's also very capable of creating plans of attack. And one of the things we have to remember is not everybody who went to school supported the revolution. So he had an advantage of he went to school, he was educated, he was brilliant, and he supports the revolution, whereas most of the military probably was not supporting. And certainly where do most of the elite military people come from? They come from the bourgeois. They come from the upper echelons who are being taken down. So he is a lower officer from a not meager beginnings, but lower educated beginnings. So he is not going to be overthrown. While all of these people who are ahead of him or atop of him, the generals and whatever, are being taken down for being part of these elitist families, he is not. So it is a perfect storm for him, and he's also brilliant. So he takes advantage of all of it in ways that I can understand. So, and also he was also very brave and very daring. So a little bit of everything. So when it's all said and done, he is basically in charge by 1799-ish. And, you know, he's invaded Italy. He's helped get access to India. He's fought in Egypt. He's a hero. And now he takes over. And what we have learned throughout history is when there is a revolution of this kind, what usually happens after the revolution? What usually happens is there's a new person in charge, and that person does exactly the same thing as the people who came before him. Think of the Arab Spring. All of these Muslim countries are overthrowing their leaders, and what happens? It's the exact same thing as it was before. Maybe the military takes over, maybe an individual takes over, but there's no change overall. And maybe people are treated better by certain people. Excuse me for a second. Oh, yeah. Would you give me an envelope? Would you mind getting me do you have an envelope? Could you give me one if you don't mind? Just a small one. So I didn't realize she was coming in this quickly. So he takes over and is probably, as most people expect him to be, the same type of dictator that everybody else is. You know, the elite will be returned and all of these things will happen. And he does not do that. He does the opposite. And this is where he is going to change things. He is the person who changes Europe. He is the person who changes the world because of it. Now, there had already been a revolution in America. You may have heard of it. Started in 1776. Maybe you hadn't heard of it. Okay, it was news at the time. So give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry, Ann. It was news at the time. And then, thank you, Ann. Sorry about that. There you go. It was news at the time. So the American Revolution happens, and we do change things. We create democracy here. It's a huge deal. However, it's not as big a deal in Europe as we might think, because America was the Wild West. So what happened in America is not as important to Europe. Yeah, they wanted America because they were getting all the stuff from America. And it was their colonies and they were in charge. But America is the Wild West. There is no history of upper crust. There's no kings, there's no dukes, there's no set level in America. In America, you can actually rise a little bit from where you came from. You came to America to get out of this system of set levels. So the revolution in America, although important, is not as important for world history in many respects as Europe, because Europe is the central place for the world. It is the center of the world at this time period. It is the most educated place. The most powerful countries are in Europe. They control much of Asia, much of Africa, much of South America. They were in control of America. So Europe is the center. And Europe is what determines, this is where the most educated are, the wealthiest are, and for a very long time, they've had a set structure in Europe. And what is the structure? The structure is very simple. You are not you. You are not a person. You are not an individual. If you live in Europe, what are you? You are part of a group, period. If you're lucky, you're part of the aristocracy. If you're really lucky, you're part of the royalty. If you're lucky, you're a landowner or a shipbuilder or part of an artist guild. If you're unlucky, you're a beggar or a peasant, which is the majority. You could also be part of the church, in what case you are part of the church. You could be a Jew. And what is a Jew? A Jew is part of an outside group, but you're still part of a group. You're not in the system, but you're still part of a group. There is no Michael or Larry or Sid. We are all Jews. And when the government comes to get taxes from us, they're not going to Larry or Michael or Sid or Robert or Eva or Jane. They're going to the leader of this Jewish community, possibly a rabbi, and saying, I want taxes. You have this many people. I need this much taxes. I need people to conscript for the military. This is how many people I need. You're part of the Jewish group. You're not an individual. Nobody's an individual. Even the king is part of the aristocracy or the royalty. And so you are relegated to your place in the world for pretty much your life. There are going to be exceptions. The truly brilliant and lucky may be able to transcend. In the Jewish world, you think of the Rothschilds, who are able to create a banking industry. Jews are not allowed in banking. This is a very big exception. You know, you may be a genius scientist, so you can do something, or a brilliant military strategist. You know, there's a few exceptions, but most of the time you're stuck. And then comes Napoleon. And Napoleon unsticks us. He is the guy who said, I don't care if you're part of the aristocracy or a peasant. If you're in my military, the better soldier is going to get promoted. I don't care if your father's a beggar and you were born on the streets. If you're a better military person, I want you as my general, as opposed to this person, Sid, whose whole family's been in the military for ages. And Sid, who is in the military. Why? Because his daddy was in the military, not because he's skilled. And Sid comes in and says, you know what, I come from this military family. I went to this school. I should be the general. And in many cases, in the past, we'd say yes, because of who your father was. And I, as Napoleon, would say, Sid, I don't even want you in my military. You're not very good. And so this is what he does. He changes everything. He tells people you can achieve success if you're dedicated to France, if you're a nationalist. He creates nationalism or makes it popular, then you are going to do well. And this is a major change in the system. This is what changes everything. Let me ask, how many countries in Western and Central Europe are dictatorships, are run by a king these days? How many kings run their countries in Europe? And the answer is none. How many countries do allow people to vote in Western Europe? All of them. From Iceland all the way down to Spain and Portugal. Now, at times you may elect a more aggressive group of leaders who are, want to thwart democracy. At times you may elect a better group of people who are more supportive of democracy. But so far, for a long time, and we know the exception, of course, in Germany in the 1940s, most of Europe, Western Europe, has been electing their officials, and it's all because of one single person. The American Revolution was important, but again, it's like for those of us in New York, wow, look, El Paso, Texas has just created a symphony that's different than our symphony. Are we going to, we're very proud of El Paso, Texas. Are we going to emulate El Paso, Texas if we're New York? No, because New York is New York. Europe is the center of the world. America is a second-class area. Certainly they got good stuff, and we appreciate the potato what we got from them, but they're still second class to us. Napoleon changes that and says, we're going to overturn this class system, which in many ways is still in Europe in some ways, but not like it was in 1785. And he is the one person who is able to do this because of his skill, because of his incredible personality, and because he wanted to upset the system, he upset a lot of people. Because people in charge do not want to give up. Now, they've already taken down a lot of the aristocracy in France, but what about rest of Europe? The rest of Europe is not excited about the French Revolution because they fear it's going to happen in their country. England, Italy, the Ottoman, well, not the Ottoman Empire as much, that's a Muslim world, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Tsar, these people are not excited about what Napoleon is doing. The military issue is one thing, but worse than the military issue is the changing of the system. That's a lot worse because losing a battle to another country is one thing. I can still be the Tsar. But if my peasants revolt against me and create another government, then all the aristocracy and all of the royalty and a lot of landowners, all the wealthy people are going to lose a lot. And what they did was they went on a massive propaganda campaign to belittle Napoleon. And the campaign worked better than even defeating him at Waterloo. Because to this day, when we think of Napoleon, we think of a short guy, right? He was not short. He was above average height for the time, which is pretty funny. He wasn't a short guy. He would have been equivalent of 5'10", 5'11" today, probably. So not a super tall guy, but not a short guy. I think it was 5'6", 5'7", which is, it's under average in America today, but back then it wasn't. He was heavy set and out of shape. No, this guy was a in shape, very strong-willed personality, not a little pipsqueak who was overweight with a voice and a comb over. And this propaganda campaign led by England succeeded brilliantly. And of course, after Napoleon was defeated the second time and he died, they continued this campaign because they did not want him to be a symbol of change. And this is why Napoleon still has this funny reputation to this day. So let's talk a little bit about what we came to talk about. Because as important as he was to Europe, granting freedom to Protestants and Freemasons, and giving the Catholics and trying to unite Catholics and Protestants together, giving opportunities for people to go to college and be educated, giving people the opportunity to become full citizens. He did something for the Jews that nobody else had. He came to the Jews and said, if you support France, you can do whatever you want. He decided to give complete and utter equality to Jews. That was unheard of and had not happened ever since the days of the Second Temple before the Romans took over. In certain places, Jews had done better. They had done better in, of course, the Netherlands. That had been like a great place for Jews to be for 200 or 300 years. That time was waning. Jews in America, of course, got a certain type of freedom, equality, but this is America. Again, it's the Wild West. They're all Meshuggah. Europe is a different place. There had been 1,000 years of oppression for Jews. He said, you can be part of our country. You can be a French citizen. And all the Jews who were in the ghettos, because remember, not all of them, but a vast majority were living in ghettos or shtetls. And when he said, do you want to leave the ghetto and go and become a French citizen? Did the Jews walk out of the ghetto? No. They ran out of the ghetto. They sprinted. They knocked the ghetto walls over. The rabbis who were saying, no, let's stay here together and be oppressed because the rabbis were in power, they knocked the rabbis over as they ran out of the ghetto. They could not get out fast enough. Well, we can go to college. We can be educated. We can do other things besides be moneylenders. We can become anything almost. This was a crazy thought, and the Jews, it was too good to be true, and then it turned out to be true. I mean, it is too good. I mean, it's basically like every dream you've ever dreamed of that you know will never happen. I'm going to be an astronaut, president of the United States, develop the cure to cancer. This is never going to happen. But then all of a sudden, guess what? It happened. One man came out and said, you in the Jewish community, I'm giving you everything you want. And the irony is, there is no record of him ever even knowing a Jew while growing up. Abraham Lincoln did some positive things for the Jews, did some negative things, but he grew up and turned out he was friends with Jews growing up. Harry Truman recognizes the state of Israel. Why? Because his best friend and a business partner was a Jew. But Napoleon had no such connection. Now, whether it's a myth or a true story, but during a campaign in Italy, he saw some guys and gals, and they're walking around, and what are they walking around with? An armband with a star on it. And he's like, what does that mean? What is that yellow thing for? It may have been a bonnet. It was either, I think, a bonnet and a yellow star, one or the other. And the soldier he was talking to, like, they're Jews. And he's like, and he said, where do they live? They live in that ghetto, in that walled area. And he's like, well, why are they living in the walled area, and why do they have those bonnets? And the people are like, because they're Jews. And he's like, okay, but why are they in the ghetto? And why? Because they're Jews. And you have this circular, and he can't understand because they're just guys. And so he says, okay, I'm closing that ghetto. Jews can live. This is before he's in total charge. This is during an Italian campaign when he's a general. I'm closing the ghetto. Jews, you can leave. Go live in the regular city. This is before he is, basically emperor of France and takes over the world. When he's in Malta, he sees the Templar Knights don't allow Jews to practice their religion. He sees the Knights are selling Jews, and he says, no, you're not doing that anymore. Stop. He just goes over and stops it. in Acre, which is spelled A-C-R-E, in what is a famous almost, he is now basically in charge of France, and he announces that once he takes Acre, he is going to invite all the Asian and African Jews to come and live in Palestine, and they can be in charge of it. 150 years before the founding of the state of Israel, almost exactly 150 years, he is going to give them their own country. Unfortunately, what happens, he's defeated at Acre by the British and some other countries, and so he does not do that. But he does say, I'm going to create a Jerusalem for Jews in France. And 1880 said, if I govern a nation of Jews, I should reestablish the Temple of Solomon. So he, says he's going to give Jews full rights, which of course nobody believes him. He says he would give Jews the country of Israel, which was Palestine at the time, or called different things, if he could take it over. He's asked by his physician in a famous note, why are you so supportive of the Jews? And he says, my primary desire was to liberate the Jews. Now this is, he's talking to his physician after he has already been defeated the second time. He's on the island of St. Helena. And his doctor asks, why were you so supportive of the Jews? He says, my primary desire was to liberate the Jews and make them full citizens. I wanted to confer upon them all the legal rights of equality, liberty, and fraternity as was enjoyed by Catholics and Protestants. It is my wish that the Jews be treated like brothers as if we are all part of Judaism. As an added benefit, I thought it would bring to France many riches because the Jews are numerous and they would come in large numbers to our country where they would enjoy more privileges than any other nation. Without the events of 1814, most of the Jews of Europe would have come to France where equality, fraternity, and liberty awaited them and where they can serve the country like everyone else. He is correct. Jews would have flocked to France if he had won, and they would have been very thankful. He added, I wanted to make them leave off usury and become like other men. By putting them upon an equality with Catholics, Protestants, and others, I hope to make them good citizens and conduct like others of the community. As the rabbis explained to him that they ought not to practice usury to their own tribes, but were allowed to do so with Christians and others, that therefore, as I'd restored them to all their privileges, they were not permitted to practice usury with me or any other, but to treat us as if we're tribe of Judah. Besides, I should have drawn great wealth to France, as the Jews are very numerous, and would have flocked to the country, as he had said before. This is what he said. Yes, there is still debate. There's debate today as to whether he wanted to give this type of freedom to Jews because he hoped they would convert to Catholicism or maybe become Protestants, or because he wanted them to bring their wealth to France. But you got to remember, there wasn't that many Jews. It's not a huge number, maybe 40,000 in all of France. So we're not talking of a huge number. And so even though he said all these things, people didn't obviously believe he was going to do it. As he said, though, faith is beyond the reach of the law. It is the most personal possession of man, and no one has the right to demand an account for it. And as the Austrian foreign minister said in 1806, all Jews look upon Napoleon as their Messiah. So in April of 1802, he created the first of a law that would, the preparations for a law to give Jews freedom. And when it became publicized that he was going to do this, a lot of people were not supportive of him. People who had supported the revolution, important people, came out. Anti-Semites came out and said, this is crazy that you do not do this. And it's incredible that Napoleon continued to do so because politically it was not helpful probably to him, because the Tsar, the kings, the leaders did not want Jews to have equality. It would create ideas they didn't want to have. And so universally, most said, do not do this, but he ignored them at first. And in 1806, he brought together a group of Jews that he called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, of course, was the ancient Jewish court. We don't know much about it in the millennium, before the Second Temple period, before the destruction of the Temple. There was a large Sanhedrin, which was like a Supreme Court, and smaller ones around the countryside that would send out people to do, be kind of like a court, judge who roved around the Wild West. The Sanhedrin continued to about 350 CE when the Romans dissolved it. It was usually a group of Jews, of course, who had legal rights to do certain things depending. So he asked 111 Jewish people from the Jewish community to come together to answer a series of questions. And that's what he brought. So these are the questions he brought them to ask. So these are the questions that were brought to the Sanhedrin. Can everybody see them? Is it lawful for Jews to marry more than one wife? Is divorce allowed? Can a Jewish marry a Christian? Can a Jew marry a Christian woman? In the eyes of Jews, are Frenchmen considered their brothers or strangers? What line of conduct does the law prescribe towards Frenchmen who are not Jews? Do Jews born in France consider themselves citizens of France? Who names the rabbis? What police jurisdiction do rabbis exercise? Are these forms of election? Are there professions which the Jews are forbidden to do? Does the law forbid the Jews from taking usury from their brethren? Does it forbid or allow to take usury from strangers? So these questions really show his ignorance of Judaism. These are really basic questions that are in many respects based on Jewish biblical law. This is a man who does not know the Jewish community very well, but yet wants to give them freedoms. Is it lawful for Jews to marry more than one wife? That had been the rule in Judaism for 2,000 years. The last time we could marry multiple wives officially was in the Bible, although some countries allowed it. Is divorce allowed in the Jewish religion? Yes. Can a Jew marry a Christian woman or a Jewish marry a Christian? The answer is no, because the country of France doesn't allow it. Are Frenchmen considered brethren? Yes, if you would allow us to call them brethren. Are we bound to protect France? Yes, if you let us. Who names the rabbis? Who cares? We don't want them anymore. We want stuff. Are there professions that Jews are not allowed to do, like usury? Are Jews allowed to do usury against Jews? The answer is yes. Biblically, no. Why are so many Jews in usury? Because it's one of the few jobs you guys let us have. So very simple questions with one basic premise. Are you going to be dedicated French citizens? And wholeheartedly, the 111 people of this Sanhedrin said, absolutely. You want to give us privileges? You're going to find us the best citizens in the world. You have no idea what we would give to this country if you give us these kind of rights that we've never seen. And so in 1806, in a special edict, after taking over parts of Prussia, he gave the freedoms. He read out the answers, and then a year later gave these freedoms. Actually, later in that year, either 1806 or 7, gave the freedoms that he had been promised. And he became another Cyrus. You know who Cyrus was, the one who let the Jews return. And for those who were very upset at him for giving equalities, he became the Antichrist, as he was called by the Tsar, which was Tsar Alexander. The Lutheran Church was upset. The Catholic Church was upset. Prussia was upset. Italy was upset. England, everybody was upset. They could not believe he was doing this. And so there was this tremendous pressure on him to overturn this decree, because it was not universally. Again, the lower classes and the revolutionaries, many of them were supportive of it, but the leaders of other countries, places he planned to take over, were not happy about it. And so because of this pressure, he did overturn some of these freedoms in 1808. And then after a very interesting incident, he overturned the overturning and gave them free rights again. So basically, he overturned it and said, I'm going to pull back on some of these rights. And then he was bestowing the Legion of Honor, which was it's still around today. It's a military honor given to anyone who distinguishes themselves. It's the highest honor, but it can be given to anybody. So he's giving it to this Jewish guy. His name was David Bloom. And says, you know, you are an incredible soldier. I am pleased to give this from you. And he says, listen, I appreciate it, but I'm not going to accept it. I'm from Alsace, which is an area of France where even that none of these laws of freedom you've given to the Jewish community are being enacted. In fact, they're being extra harsh on us now because of these freedoms. And so after speaking with them, he says, you know what, forget the 1808 one. We're going to just keep it. Jews are now completely free. And he goes around and ensures that everybody in the areas who were not following what his dictum follows it. And so Jews are now given full rights for another few years before he's overthrown. Now, the Jews of France, the Netherlands, Western Germany, Italy, really take hold, and all of these rights start to become part of their vernacular in a very short time. However, we know what happens. He's defeated, he comes back, and he's defeated again. Waterloo is his end, as we know from the ABBA song. And what happens next? Now, all of these countries, you know, as they have fought and kicked him out now, they go back and try and enact the repressive rules that have been around before Napoleon, because they want the system of the levels of aristocracy, the fiefdoms, this whole system be back in place. And for the next 85 years or so, the countries of Western and Central Europe are going to go back and forth with the tension of those who want these new freedoms and those who want to keep the old ways. And it's going to be back and forth in many countries. In France, too, they're going to be a little bit more restrictive. And another person comes over to send him Napoleon. He's going to make it more lenient. They're going to be restrictive. We all know about the Dreyfus Affair at the end of the 19th century. That's going to be the final piece. But as we see, as I mentioned, every country eventually goes one way. Up until Germany in the 1930s, most of the countries will start becoming more democratic and giving freedoms. Some will be later, Spain and Italy, obviously, but eventually there will be elections in all of the countries. And today, all of them are now democracies, although some are leaning another way or some are leaning another. So his legacy is that the world is the way it is today because of him. I mean, Europe is Europe because of Napoleon and nobody else. And it wasn't an easy road, and people don't like giving up power, but what we see is what we already know. Once an idea has been brought forth, once somebody sees something, it's really hard to put it back in the closet. Once you see equality is possible, it's impossible to hide it unless you kill every single person who saw it. And if you don't do that, you can't keep it. Michael, did you have a question? And you're on, okay. So this is his legacy. His legacy is equality, elections, freedom. The irony, of course, is he was a dictator, but he brought about the idea that people should be able to rise because of their skills and not because of their blood. And giving freedom to the Jews who are not even part of the system was certainly a big part of it. If you're giving freedoms to even them, and the pushback must have been incredible from behind the scenes, because even people who were fighting for freedoms probably thought giving freedom to the Jews may be going a little too far. But yet he did it, and that wasn't his downfall, obviously, attacking, but that certainly helped to really upset the Tsar, and is one of the reasons Tsar got people to support him when they went to war again, when he went to war against them. So, yes, Larry.
Could you talk a little bit more about usury in the time of Napoleon and the Jewish population? You had mentioned, I thought you said that the Jews were not allowed in the banking industry. The Rothschilds were, later, different. They got in somehow. But and we're familiar with, Venice and usury, the Merchant of Venice. We're used to, the Jews being excluded from all of the other things. But were they the only ones that were money lenders then? Because I never realized how important usury was as far as Napoleon's, I could see where you could take both sides, that he wanted them to convert,
right,
to mend their evil ways and to join the world population. And I could take that attitude as well.
Usury was still a part of the Jewish world, but not as it had been. For a long time, Jews were in the usury business because Christians weren't allowed. Eventually, both Catholics and Protestants realized there was a lot of money to be made in the usury, and they took it over. So by the 19th century, when banking is already starting, Jews are not always involved and often are not allowed. Certain places they are, and certain places they're not. However, the reputation never left. That reputation is still around today. No small part because of books like, the Merchant of Venice and Oliver Twist. So the reputation for Jews being in the money lending and taxation business is a reputation that still is around today, even though we didn't really want to go in those businesses. So there were still Jews. Remember, by 1800, the Jews of Amsterdam and Netherlands, their power has started to wane quite a bit. In other places, Jews are not doing as well. Some have gone to America. A lot of them are now living in the Ottoman Empire. A lot of them the bulk of Jews are in Eastern Europe, in shtetls, which has nothing to do with this, because all of this stuff does not reach Tevye. We're not going to have that change in Eastern Europe ever. Those Jews are going to evacuate, and it'll start happening a little bit in the 20th century, and then of course the Holocaust happens. But it's a very short period in the 20th century it reaches them, because you've got the war with the revolution, and then in the 20th century you've got the war, the Great War, you've got the Civil War, and then you've got the Depression, and you've got World War II. And this is all one after the other in Eastern Europe. Yes, Larry.
You had mentioned earlier something about he started the central banking system in England, in France. was that also an attempt to control interest rates? And you kind of think of as, did he try to reform not only the Jews then at that time, but apparently since this usurious trading or usurious interest rates were wide, let's say not only Jewish, was the banking then part of the
Yeah,
reform that he
by that
instituted?
time, I don't think usury Jews were controlling, doing in that. They weren't in banking at that time. I don't believe that. I don't think that had anything to do with the Jewish world. One of the main things he wanted to do with the bank and the stock exchange was taxation. He wanted to change the tax system so that it was more equitable to people who were at the lower levels. So the idea that the people who were poorer or the lower levels were getting taxed exorbitantly, that's what he wanted to change. He wanted to make it more of a fair taxation system. So he created the bank, he created the tax system and the stock exchange. I do not know how all these things work. But that was probably the central reason, was to, of course, fund his wars and to fund France, but also to tax the wealthy as well as the poor. Michael.
This is a different question. I thought this was really, just so incredibly interesting. How did you become acquainted with this subject matter, or what made you delve into it? If it's your idea.
Well, I think I took a class and then I read, I forgot, I'm trying to remember the name of the book I read. It may have been Napoleon and the Jews or The Secret History of, I forgot what, Napoleon and the Jews, I think, was the book I read. And it was just really interesting. And I'd heard, I think in school I was reading where the Jews thought Napoleon was the Messiah. That's really what led me to it. And so a few years ago I went into study, and it's really interesting stuff because, the Jews are always looking for Messiah. We don't give that moniker to many people. It's happened like 4 or 5 times in the last 2,500 years. There was Cyrus, there was Alexander, there was Bar Kokhba, there was Shabtai Zvi, Napoleon, Michael Schwartz. So those 6. Those are probably the
Well, we
6
know who the
favorites.
true Messiah is.
Yes, we do know. And so why would they give the moniker? The question is, why would they call him? Why would, I don't think it was the Tsar, it was the foreign minister of Prussia, I think, call Napoleon the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. And that's why you look at this. And it's a curious situation because he did it without any logical reason. I mean, yes, the Jews might bring some really brain power to it. There's going to be some Jews that are be very supportive, and they're going to bring some money. But the Jewish community is very small, and most of the Jewish community is oppressed, and most of the wealthy Jewish community are not necessarily just in France. I mean, there's certainly a few very famous ones. So there's really not a reason for him to go against all his advisors, to threaten his power to help these people, where we don't think he didn't grow up with the best friend who was Jewish. There wasn't a Jewish couple next door where when his parents were abusing him, he went and hung out at the Jewish house and they were so nice to him. We just don't see that. So he's in many ways one of these people who takes his beliefs and actually just goes forward with them and doesn't back down. This is my belief. This is what we're doing. Deal with it. To his detriment. And that was really, so even though he's a warmonger, we know, and he wants to take over Europe, and he was a dictator, certainly the attitude towards the people is what made him a hero. So he was a hero to the majority of the people. I mean, they loved him, and also kept winning. And when you win, people love you too. And so, but, why was he supportive of the Jews, where if he had been just supportive of the Protestants and Catholic lower classes, he would have been more popular And then when he started supporting Jewish causes, his popularity waned a little bit. He took a hit for it. So there's no reason for him, because in the long run, it would probably been better for him to not support the Jews. But yet he still did it. So that's what's really interesting about him. Whereas in other places, leaders are very supportive of the Jewish community throughout history, but they're getting something out of it, or there's a reason. I'm supportive of my Jews because if they attack the Jews, they may attack me. Or the Jewish community is really raising money for me, so I need them. Or I don't want people killing Jews because I don't want people killing anybody because it creates mass hysteria and then I might get killed. So there's usually a reason why people are supportive of people. He is a little different.
Rabbi, a lot of his conquests, a lot of his expeditions and wars led him into Muslim countries. Did he write at all about whether or not he believed that Judeo-Christian ethic was also applied to Muslims?
Yeah, he did. He was very, I mean, again, he went to war, but he felt the same way as Muslims as he did about Jews. Obviously, that's a different situation because, that's a foreign power he's fighting, whereas the Jews were not like that. But yeah, he felt that way about it. I mean, he was very supportive. He often says, Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and all others. He adds it in often. But, there wasn't a huge, again, it's a little different with the Muslim population because they were foreign countries that he was possibly at war with. It was a different world also. But yes, definitely.
You had mentioned earlier about canned foods, and just as a real sideshow here, excursion, there was a show on TV maybe about 20 years ago that I recall by a guy named James Burke, and he wrote a series of episodes about something called Connections, which I thought was marvelous at the time. If you get a chance, I have the book someplace. But what he tried to show was, how things move from one step to the next step, how much of science and civilization advances in sort of an evolutionary kind of way. And he uses the Napoleon with the canned foods as far as the canning industry to go on to show the French were very, very good at things like artillery and rocketry and things of that nature, and how the advances that from the canned food industry of learning how to make a can led to advances in learning how to make rocket tubes and things.
Oh, really? How interesting.
It's quite a stretch that he makes, and eventually he comes up with the atomic bomb. We start with a can of food, and now we have an atomic bomb, which shows how to contain something with nuclear fission inside of it and things. So, but it's quite an interesting expedition there that he goes. I don't know whether it's a straight line, but there's many, many other things that take place. But certainly it was an innovation, the use of cans.
Very cool. Yeah, again.
It's a marvelous story that he weaves.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But again, with Napoleon, it's. I mean, this is a good point. I mean, he was very much, how can we learn and get better? I mean, he wanted to learn and to improve, and technology was essential. And so, we'll finish here because I want to see if we can set the date. I mean, it's also ironic that it's his. He creates this idea that's going to lead to freedom and elections, but the last ruler of France was Napoleon's nephew. So his nephew would eventually become president, become dictator, and then he's overthrown. And so his nephew would be the last of the dictators in France. So pretty interesting irony there. So fabulous. Thanks for studying today. Do we want to do in-person study groups in Sun City, one in November and a Hanukkah party in December? Are people up for that? Or are we not ready for that yet?
We could probably do that. I was thinking of something that apparently Temple Oseh Shalom has done off-site here that's been pretty popular. It was during the summer, was they did a couple of meetings at the beach. I don't know whether people would be into going to the beach or to Sergeant Jasper Park or to something like that to have an off-site meeting. Just a thought that, people bring their own bagel and lox and stuff like that. And this way, nobody is, rearranging their house. And and all these, whatever problems they have there. But
Are people up for going to the park or a beach? Is it going to be too cold, do you think, or it'll be fine? I'm happy to do anything. I'm happy to keep. So do we want to think of doing like a Wednesday morning study session and lunch, or is it something people, I don't want to do it if people don't feel comfortable doing it. Just, thought we tried it last year. I thought we tried it again.
yeah, last year I think COVID was still pretty active,
Right.
and with the winter time coming, who knows if COVID will
Could we get one? Could we get one of those big rooms at Sun City? How much are those to rent?
Fortunately, they charge.
They charge, and I'm not sure they allow you to bring food in or anything like
Okay.
that. But that's why I was thinking of an outdoor setting is
Right.
probably, at Sergeant Jasper Park, or even here if you wanted to at the Sun City around the lake there and stuff, except that those are a little bit more public. But Sergeant Jasper Park is pretty nice, and they have picnic tables there, and we could bring
Sergeant
chairs, things like that.
Jasper Park. Is that in Sun City?
It's not in Sun City. It's right near Highway 95. It's as you get off of exit 8 of Highway 95. We're about 6 or 7 miles from there.
Okay, I see it now. All right. Well, I'm happy to do Sergeant Jasper Park if people want. What do you guys think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure, attendance has not been great here, whether or not people would come out for but we could, an in-person, we could try it, I think. I'm only using it as a success,
I'm happy to do
only
whatever.
the only data point I have is the Oseh Shalom seems to have been successful in, in their getting people to come to the beach,
What do you want to? We can do the beach as well.
Yeah, or the beach. Beach is a little bit further, and the problem with the beach is by the time you park your car, you got to walk a little bit of a distance, and some people, were, not that comfortable in walking and lugging a chair and things like this. Where in Sergeant Jasper Park, as I recall the setup there, the parking is right next to the picnic area.
All right,
so
I'm happy to do it. You want to try that, Michael? I see if you're not sure about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how far you have to walk at the park. It's an easier walk for sure than any of the beach areas. That's all I was thinking about.
All right, so you think it'd be good? So why don't we do that on Sergeant Jasper Park, and we can do like potluck, or I can bring fried chicken. I can get Publix fried chicken, and people I can bring that, or if people want, but no pressure though.
Yeah, we can advertise it as, and for some thoughts as far as what do you think first, and for Wednesday at noontime or lunch or something like or 10:30 or something, bring a bagel and lox or whatever you wanted to.
All right, so do what? How about like?
Now, I know you're coming to Sun City, not Sun City, but you're coming for the meeting that you're doing, the joint meeting with Hadassah and
Yeah.
In the temple.
And on November 5th, right?
No, the 16th.
The 16th, I'm sorry, the 16th. Okay, that's also on a Wednesday. I
You
don't
want to
know.
do it on that day?
Well,
The trouble is that we have to be at the church by 1 o'clock. And the
Okay, then we
people
won't do it. So
running it would have to be in the church by about 12:30, because the man who is going to set up the microphones, etc., said he would be there at 12:30.
yeah, what I was thinking is you probably don't even want to have your meeting that morning,
right, yeah. How about
yeah,
November 30th, the week after Thanksgiving?
Is it too close to Thanksgiving? It's not for us because we're staying here, but I don't know how.
It's the
other
week
people-
after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's probably okay. I think we should try it for that day, for November 30th. If you wanted to, could we make it a joint, outdoor Hanukkah party kind of thing, get together and see if people might want to come?
If we want to do it the Hanukkah,
I don't know what
party,
Hanukkah
we
is.
could do it December.
Hanukkah's Christmas time this year, I think.
Oh, is it late? Hanukkah's very
Yeah, we
late.
could do like this November 30th, and then we could try like December 21st or something.
All right, well, I would suggest let's at least throw it out there and see what people say. Are you interested? November 30th, if you're going to Sergeant Jasper Park for a lunch and learn, bring your own food, or
I'll bring chicken.
or you want to chip in for
We can
things.
chip in and
yeah,
buy food.
Yeah,
picnic
whatever.
food.
Okay, perfect. And then and then the Hanukkah
Is
party.
that shit okay with everybody here at least?
Yeah.
You know, we don't have a real
And how about
representation.
how about the 14th, the Hanukkah party? So if people are going out of town the week before Hanukkah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
we
far
could-
enough
we-
away from Christmas if you have other
yeah,
obligations.
we could announce both of those, you know, and see what they say. And, you know, you could announce it even to the entire Mikveh Israel congregation, you know, if they wanted to come to Sergeant Jasper Park, you know, for a lunch and learn, or if there's a park between here and Savannah, you know, that
A
we
rest
could meet
area.
at. Yeah, not a rest area.
Well, that's good though, a rest area. You have toilets, you have everything.
Is there a Buc-ee's between here and Savannah? That we-
If we did that, we could do that would be there. So we'll make it the Hanukkah party,
Yeah, let me write these down. What dates are you thinking of now? November?
November 30th and December 14th.
November 30th and December 14th. Okay, and
Take
November
us off
16th.
YouTube now as we're doing that.
Well,
All right.
November 16th, you know, is
November